Well, what was your favorite moment of the Carnell Tate era at Oregon? All right, jokes aside, there is something to talk about here.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. The question that I submitted to the mailbag, technically, but not technically, about the lines of scrimmage is on today's show. Basketball stumbles, and where does Oregon's greatest national title competition come from in the coming years of college football? That's all coming up today, but let's start with this. So last week, I was obviously joking off the top. Guys, we haven't won a national championship yet in football. Although there are now two statistical matrices that say Oregon was, so, make that whatever you'd like. But self-deprecation is important for my mental health, or else I don't know if I'd be able to do this show every day. So, appreciate you bearing with me there. There's something that I was legitimately thinking about, though, when I first heard that Oregon was interested in adding Carnell Tate from Ohio State, who was their number 3 receiver this past year and is going to be their number 2 receiver to Jeremiah Smith next year. That's not a bad gig to have, by the way. He's staying with the Buckeyes. I'm not all that surprised. I was a little surprised that Oregon had some interest, but it made me wonder, why would they have had that interest? What about the wide receiver room to Oregon's coaching staff doesn't look like it is up to standard, isn't giving Dante Moore all the necessary quality pass catchers that they need? Now, maybe they have a bunch of guys in their room who they feel good about, which they should. They have recruited, Junior Adams has recruited that position better than any wide receiver coach in my lifetime, probably ever in the history of Oregon football. Over the last 3 years, they have had great production. They have brought in quality transfers. They have had high school recruits like Troy Franklin really developed over their time with the Ducks. So they have done a lot at that position to change the perception of what Oregon wide receivers are. But maybe it's just that Carnell Tate, who is a known commodity as a player, is a known entity that you have an understanding of what he can be because you've seen him do it, just has zero questions. Whereas every other guy that you look at in that wide receiver room for Oregon, including one of their newcomers, Malik Benson, has legitimate questions. Heck, even Evan Stewart has questions of sorts because he's coming off of an injury that he unfortunately suffered ahead of the Rose Bowl matchup. And I don't know that it's expected to be super serious. I don't believe that it is, but he's coming back to Oregon. For one reason or another, he has never had a 1,000-yard season. He's a really, really good player. He can have that sort of year. I think he's Oregon's top receiver going into next year if he's able to stay healthy. And then you have DeCorian Moore coming in, the 5-star true freshman, and there's still a question because he hasn't taken a single snap of college football yet. Incredibly high ceiling. On paper, very high floor. Justice Lowe has not been asked to do it for a full season. He got dinged up this year as well. So did Kyler Casper. Jerion Dickey's been dinged up before. And those guys have plenty of talent. In some cases have years of light game experience with heavy practice experience. And you're looking at what they can bring to the table in 2025. And it's easy to talk yourself into any one of those guys, or Jeremiah McLaughlin, or any of the other guys that are in the wide receiver room, and think, yeah, I think this guy's going to be, popping off this year. This guy's going to have a great season. But every single one of those guys in some form or fashion has a question mark. It doesn't mean it's a huge question or a doubt. It just means that it's a question mark. Whereas Carnell Tate, no question. So I wonder what that biggest question is that they were trying to remove. Is it that you have a handful of guys that have had some injuries? Is it that you have a handful of guys that are not super experienced yet? You want to work them slower into the wide receiver rotation over this year and the next one? I don't really know. But there is some question or some fundamental reason why Oregon would consider adding a guy like Carnell Tate from Ohio State. But he's going to stay there, be the number 2 wideout to Jeremiah Smith, which is probably a great place to be, because I don't think there's a wideout in college football that's going to draw as much attention nationally as Jeremiah Smith. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. levels, also at Ohio State, or Jamar Chase, LSU, like those sorts of guys that going into every single week, every coaching staff is going to have a specific game plan for how do we limit this guy and make everybody else beat us. So if, in a single high safety look, he's getting rolled to Jeremiah Smith every time, that gives Carnell Tate a lot of one-on-one opportunities. So I understand why he would want to be there. I also, pivoting back to Oregon, seeing as this is Locked On Ducks, feel fine about Oregon's wide receiver room. Would Carnell Tate bring a higher floor to that position group? Yes, but amongst all the options that Oregon's got as perimeter pass catchers, I'm not even talking about the tight ends. They bring in Jamari Johnson from Louisville to supplement Kenyon Sadiq, Roger Saleapaga, Vander Plug, AJ Pugliano. Like those guys are all in the tight end room. I feel pretty solid about that group, Sadiq in particular, who this season, according to PFF, actually graded higher than Terrence Ferguson, who everydayers and people who have been that for many years, I appreciate you, by the way, are aware that I have been a big T-Ferg fan for the last couple seasons. He's been really, really good. And Sadiq can be really, really good. He's different than Terrence Ferguson, but he's really, really good. But for this wide receiver room, Evan Stewart, I think, gives you a known entity on the perimeter, assuming that he is healthy. Malik Benson is a little bit more of a wild card for me, the transfer from Florida State, because he had 2 great years at JUCO, but couldn't fly up the depth chart at Alabama. And then he was over at Florida State, where there were glimpses, but that offense was so inept. How do you even decipher any of that? But at the Power 4 level, he hasn't had 500 yards in a season. So somebody in this wide receiver room is going to pop, unless Oregon has no passing offense to speak of. And that could result in no 1,000-yard receivers, and you have 3 or 4 guys in the 500 to 800-yard range. I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world, necessarily. Oregon did not have a 1,000-yard receiver this season, by the way. Tez Johnson was at 898. He would have gotten there had he not gotten hurt. But that's also kind of the point of having all of this depth, of having a guy, a developmental piece like Justice Lowe, be able to fill in for Tez Johnson or Evan Stewart when they're out and give you some meaningful snaps and make an impact on the field. So I just wonder what that question is. Are these guys not quite ready? / they're not fully healthy / we don't know if they're going to stay healthy. I don't know. But there was some reason. We're never going to get a straight answer. I think we all understand that at this point, as to why the interest was there. But there was some reason, just something to think about on this Monday morning, afternoon, evening, night, whenever you're listening to or watching this show. I expect Oregon's trench play, though, to be really, really good. You've got high-level portal additions, some notable returners, NFL caliber guys. Which line of scrimmage unit's going to be better? Well, only the wisest among us could submit such a question. And one of us definitely did. But right now, this is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting, wondering, worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return well. You get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. This is Taxes Now with TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Check them out at TurboTax.com. Recruiting's the lifeblood of your program. Second segment, Sips, lifeblood of this show. So let's talk trenches here. I facetiously, but not so facetiously, asked last week if one of you, or suggested one of you, asked me which line would be better, offensive line or defensive line going into next year, 3 of you submitted such a question. So props to all of you for having a great thought. I mean, just really insightful, good conversation upcoming. Let's get into it. I look at the offensive line as projecting out like this. Tackles, Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, couple of transfers. Emmanuel Prenon, also transfer. Bedford transferred last year but was hurt. Poncho starts at center with Davey Uli, Kavika Rogers, and Janoris Wilson as your next guys up. And there has not been a year since I have been covering the Ducks on this show in which only 5 offensive linemen have played an important role. That number is 7 minimum, probably 8. So that's why I go that deep, and I went 3 deep with rotation guys on the other side as well. Defensive line, starting unit most likely Tatum Tuioti, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, Mateo Uyunglele, with heavy snaps from Aiden Breland, Blake Purchase, and Elijah Rushing maybe, Ashton Porter, Terrence Green, mix of guys, not really sure. So I went back and forth on this because on paper, I actually went to the offensive line pretty quickly because it's a much more experienced unit. Harkey's been in college football for a couple of years. This is Isaiah World's final season of eligibility. I believe it is Harkey's as well. Bedford's going into his 7th year of college football. Poncho's going into his 3rd and his 2nd starting at center for the Ducks. And Emmanuel Prenon was a class of 2022 recruit who has started at Wyoming and at USC. And the guys behind him, Davey Uli, Kavika Rogers, Janoris Wilson, all had meaningful snaps on the offensive line this past season. So that's where I went first. But then I thought about this past year and how the offensive line played out. It didn't start out great, right? The Idaho and the Boise State games, those were a disaster for Oregon's offensive line. 2.9 yards a carry against Idaho, 7 sacks allowed in those 2 games. I don't think you could have envisioned Oregon's offensive line against those teams playing any worse. And then they settled in and finished as a finalist for the Joe Moore Award given to the best offensive line in college football. Now, that's not the impression that they left with how poor the run blocking was against Ohio State. I didn't think the pass blocking was actually as bad as 8 sacks indicated. I thought at least 5 of those really were coverage sacks. But certainly they didn't play particularly well in that spot. But I'm going with the defensive line here. I like Oregon's offensive line. I just think there's going to be an adjustment again because that's what we saw this season. And I think their offensive line, with all the experience and talent and depth you have up there aren't really that many questions. But the experience, talent, depth argument applies to the defensive line as well. So I thought about it from a depth standpoint and an overall talent. And I also thought about it with regards to how many NFL draft picks you've got in each particular group. Isaiah World, I think, is the most likely early to mid-round NFL draft selection along the offensive line. Maybe Poncho has a big year and ups his draft stock at the center position a la Jackson Powers Johnson. But defensively, I know that you have a first-round pick in Mateo Uyunglele. You could have a couple more loading in Aiden Breland or Elijah Rushing, depending on how big their roles are and how closely they're able to live up to the potential they had with their recruiting billing coming out of high school as 5-star guys. You've got Blake Purchase back after redshirting this past year, and he played a key role as a true freshman. Mateo and Tatum Tuioti both got better from their freshman and their sophomore years. I don't see why that wouldn't be the case again from sophomore to their junior years. I am bullish on Amari Washington and Bear Alexander. I think Bear Alexander can be a Jamari Caldwell type where you don't necessarily see a big statistical impact, but you look up and he's got a really good Pro Football Focus grade, and it's just kind of disruptive and annoying teams from time to time. I don't think either one. I think Amari Washington is more similar to Derek Harmon, or can be closer to that sort of guy than Bear Alexander can. But certainly that's someone who I also feel can be an NFL draft pick caliber guy one day. So I like Oregon's defensive line because of the returning production that they have, and that I've seen those guys play together. I mean, there were a bevy of reps last year. I don't know the exact number, where your defensive line was 3 of those 4. Mateo, Amari Washington, Tatum Tuioti. Now you put Bear Alexander into the fold, and that's probably your starting unit. Whereas with the offensive line, at least in the first month of the season, I'd expect there's going to be a little bit of adjustment. There usually is. But with that many new players, I mean, you've got essentially 1 returning starter. Now, it's not the only returning player from this past line with the 3 rotation guys in there, and maybe one of them beats them out in spring football. But I think the continuity being stronger along the defensive line combined with the best individual player of the group is Mateo. I go defensive line here. I think both units will be good. I don't think either unit will be as good as they were this past year. But top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten, yes, absolutely for both. That is my expectation. Curious as your guys' thoughts on that debate. Offensive or defensive line? Make your cases below or shoot me a note. Curious to see what you guys say. This mailbag question came in from JJ, which I did not inherently suggest. With Dante Moore, not being an elite athlete, do you see Luke Moga carving out a Brian Bennett type role? We hear how athletic he is. Would be nice to get the ball in his hands. So this shouldn't just be, well, we hear how athletic Luke Moga is. You just need to watch one play from the spring game. Luke Moga is the most athletic player to play quarterback for Oregon or to be a quarterback at Oregon since Marcus Mariota. That is not an exaggeration. Dylan Gabriel or Bo Nix or Herbert, none of them run like Luke Moga does. Now, he is incredibly raw as a passer, but if he ever figures that out, crazy athlete. I have compared him before and think he is, and this is someone that Oregon actually went after coming out of high school as well. I think his ceiling is Avery Johnson at Kansas State. Be a capable passer and be one of the best runners on the field at any position. And if you look at the play where he hands the ball off in the spring game and he's behind the play and then all of a sudden he just runs down the field and catches up with a 15-yard deficit behind the play or whatever it was, that's not normal for a quarterback. So with regards to Dante's athleticism, though, Dante Moore, I don't know that I'd characterize him as, a subpar athlete. He's not a runner by trade. He's not immobile, though. He is someone who wants to run to throw. But if in a big spot you wanted to run him, like Big Ten championship game, for instance, when it's 3rd and 1, first down ices the game, they go quarterback run with Dylan Gabriel. Could you do that with Dante Moore? Yes. Would you run him the way that Bo Nix was run in the Kenny Dillingham offense in 2022 or that Mariota was run back in the day? No. You wouldn't do that. He's not that kind of athlete. But there just shouldn't be I just don't want you to have the image of him as he's a statue who only makes plays from the pocket. No, that's where he wants to play. That's where he's going to be at his best. But to say that you can't sprint the pocket out or you can't pick up 4 or 5 yards running down the field, he's not a Jared Goff type where he's just sitting in the pocket like that. But to your point about Moga, I mean, if they were to trust him and they brought in a Wildcat package in the red zone, teams all over college football have run that effectively year in and year out. So yeah, I could see it. I legitimately could, because I don't think Moga is close, based on what I've heard, to being ready as a passer. Now, maybe he's willing to sit for another year or 2 and try to develop along those lines and compete for the starting job whenever Dante Moore is an Oregon starter. He hasn't officially been named that, but I think we all understand what's going to happen here. But Moga is such a good athlete that of the quarterbacks Oregon has, he would be the most qualified to come in and be the Wildcat quarterback. He's got a year under his belt, so crazier things have happened. And when you get down in that red zone area, you get an advantage. Quarterback run is super popular in the red zone in the NFL as well. The Bills do it a lot with Josh Allen, and Texas did it this past year with Arch Manning quite a bit. Quinn Ewers, not a super mobile guy. Dante Moore is more mobile than that. But why do they bring in a guy that runs better? Because it gives you a numbers advantage, and that could be a good thing to have. So yeah, he could have that. He could have that sort of role. I could see it. I was also able to not see, but just not be surprised that Oregon basketball lost on the road to a Minnesota team that was 2-6 in conference play. Is it time to worry? First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. Chiefs, Eagles, one game, two teams, endless possibilities. Fly, Eagles, fly. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Because whether you're rooting for the Eagles or whether you don't like football, you can make it more exciting with FanDuel. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. They've got all sorts of live betting features. You can bet college football too. Oregon's FanDuel win total is 10.5, same as last year. Whew, that's audacious. But FanDuel trusts Oregon. If you do as well, FanDuel.com, that's the place to go. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Well, it finally happened. I say finally when referring to Dana Altman's squad getting upset by a team they're favored against, even on the road, because the way they were playing did not feel sustainable. It matters and absolutely is still a good thing that Oregon found ways to win games against Penn State or Ohio State. Now, the Penn State game was kind of the inverse here, where Oregon had a big lead against Penn State on the road, and then they kind of had to hang on and scrap and fight and claw their way after blowing the lead at some point in the second half, but they ended up winning the game. That's what happened here against Minnesota. So Oregon goes to Minnesota. Dawson Garcia goes for about 700 points, and Oregon loses 77-69. He had 31, to be exact, on 19 shots. And the difficult thing with Garcia, he's a 6'8", 6'9" forward, super skilled, can shoot, drive, great array of moves. Everything I would like for KJ Evans to be. He is if you took KJ Evans and Brandon Angel and put them into the same player. That is what he is. Size, physicality, skill, footwork. Now, this was a problem because Brandon Angel was having a great game offensively. He led Oregon with 18 points. But at the other end, Brandon Angel is not the defender that KJ Evans is. Conversely, KJ Evans has none of the offensive effectiveness right now in his career that Brandon Angel has. Evans had 2 points on 0 of 3 shooting. Angel had 18 points on 5 of 10 shooting. So that was just a tough matchup, and Dana had to go back and forth. The real problem in this game is that Oregon came out, was down 16 before the game even really started. And they have had this issue a couple times. It has not been every single game that Oregon's been down, but what Oregon has been consistent with, and far more college basketball teams are like this than you would probably think, they hit lulls. They go through long stretches where they just don't play well. Sometimes it's at the beginning of the game. Sometimes it's later in the game. Against Penn State, for instance, Oregon built a big lead, was aggressive, attacking, smart, playing really well, and then all of a sudden, they took their foot off the gas and they were just kind of going through the motions. Well, they were going through the motions to begin this game against Minnesota, whose record is not going to impress you. However, they have now won 3 straight games, one of which was on the road at Iowa, who's a fine team, and 2 of which were now over top 25 teams, Oregon and then Michigan previously. So when you think back to the football season and go to that Wisconsin game when Oregon really should have lost, but just found a way to win somehow, some way, looking back on it now, would you rather have Oregon lost the game? Legitimate question to ask. Let me know in the comments below. I am legitimately curious because I look back at that game and say, not just from a ranking standpoint, but from a mindset, from, there can be a pressure that comes with being undefeated. But when you lose, it can snap you back in mentally like, oh, this stinks. And that happens to this squad for Dana and company pretty often, where they fall behind. They were down as many as 18 points. They came back to take the lead in the second half. That's a 20-point turnaround for those of us that can do a little simple math. Where is that 20-plus point margin when the game begins? So what I'm hoping we see, in Oregon plays UCLA on the road on Thursday in a revenge game, since UCLA came to Matthew Knight Arena and won on a desperation, lucky, banked in three, basically at the buzzer in what was a good competitive basketball game. Can Oregon take this game where they get upset, their tournament hopes are not in peril unless they, basically lose every game from here on out? I don't know what record exactly Oregon, they're 16-4 at the moment with some really, really good wins. But I mean, at this point, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games left. I'd say they probably have to win 6 of those, and they're into the tournament pretty solidly. Now, what seed you get, that depends on how many you win. But I hope they can take this loss and turn that into, we're not letting that happen again. Because I've seen that play out in small ways throughout the course of a game. Now I'm hoping it travels from one game to the next. But with the way that Oregon had been in close games, they hadn't lost a road game all year or a neutral site game, anything away from Matthew Knight Arena, they hadn't lost yet this season. And it was bound to happen. You play enough close games, you play enough road games, you're going to lose. That's the way college basketball goes. Now it's about how they respond. So I think that they're still fine, but I would like to see what happens if they put together, no one plays a 40-minute game, but when they put together 35 minutes of good basketball, it's beating Alabama, who's ranked in the top 5, and beating Texas A&M, who's ranked in the top 12. That's what the ceiling of this team is. So they played really well out of the gate. That was unusual. They have now come down a notch, and I'm waiting for them to go back up and have every expectation that they will. So that's the latest hoops update. Here's a question to end today's show, football-wise, from Scott. Looking forward, if you had to pick 10 programs, there's only one program, and that's Oregon, obviously. Everything else is a program. Best situated to win a national title in the next 5 years, who would they be and why? Any surprises out there or just the usual suspects? That's for you to decide. My list is based on what you've done in the last couple of years, so where your program is at and where your expectations are, how you have recruited and how you can recruit, what your coaching staff is. That's pretty much it. And this list is not very big, and Oregon is on it. In no particular order, I'd say the 10 best are as follows. Oregon's up there. Ohio State, again, this is in no order. Georgia, Notre Dame, Texas, Alabama. I think they will absolutely rebound at some point. You said 5 years. Kalen DeBoer will get things figured out. Penn State, that has a great chance to win a national championship. Might talk about them more on tomorrow's show because Oregon plays them on the road, and that's easily their toughest game. Michigan has recruited at a high level. I don't think Michigan's national title level in 2025, but in 2026, I'd be surprised if they are not. The last two, I struggled with these because the list gets pretty thin pretty quickly. So I'll give you the teams that I didn't include here and why they just missed my top 10. Tennessee, I don't know about Josh Heupel yet. I think he's good. I don't know if he is good enough. He has not been to a conference championship game in the last couple of years. He's brought Tennessee to a high level, had them in the playoff. He has them on an upward trajectory from where they once were. But I don't know about him yet, and I don't know what Nico Iamaleava will be for the next couple of seasons at quarterback. So that's why they were an almost. LSU was an almost because Brian Kelly should have been better at this point. He hasn't won double-digit games yet. The potential is there. I know LSU as a program can't. I don't know if Brian Kelly can at LSU. I haven't seen that yet. Miami was a just miss for me. They recruited too high a level to ignore. What do you think my number one concern is? Can Mario Cristobal win a national championship? Could. Hire the right coordinators. It can happen. SMU's also just on the outside looking in because they're in fertile recruiting ground. They have maximum commitment from their boosters in university. Their head coach, Rhett Lashley, is really good. He won the American, then was a runner-up in the ACC in consecutive years. But do they know how to play at that next level? I'm not convinced of that just yet, and I think that their recruiting has to take a couple steps forward as well. The teams I have at 9 and 10 are Clemson and Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M is probably going to be the most surprising one, but the narrative around Texas A&M and Oregon, frankly, are kind of similar. A lot of money, a lot of investment, nothing to show for it, right? Oregon's got far more to show for it than Texas A&M, who's never played in an SEC conference championship game. Oregon just won the Big Ten in year one. But Texas A&M has everything that you need to win a national championship. They've always had that. They were just missing the right coach. Mike Elko, darn good football coach. In year one, took them from missing a bowl to 8 wins, and they at one point controlled their own destiny to win the SEC and make the playoff. They didn't get there. I didn't expect them to coming into the season. So he is good. The resources are there. The commitment's there. They can recruit at a high level. In the next 5 years, yeah, he could put them in that position. But Dabo Swinney at Clemson, starting to dabble in the transfer portal a little bit. He doesn't have to go full on Colorado or even use it as much as Oregon does. But there are a couple of key spots where when you lose a guy, like they lost Andrew Makuba at safety, and they weren't able to backfill with a guy who I think was as good as what Makuba was, that sort of talent deficit can make a difference here and there. Makuba, by the way, went to play for Texas, who they lost to in the college football playoff. That's irony, but still, the point is valid that you got to use it at least a little. You can have discussions from now until the end of time about how much is right, what's too much, what disrupts the culture, and all those sorts of things. We can have those conversations all off season if you like. I'm happy to engage. But you don't have to be super portal heavy. Ohio State wasn't super portal heavy this past year. They got a couple of key guys. Their quarterback, safety, running back. I think there was one other guy who was a transfer. That was kind of it. Everybody else, homegrown recruits. So I think Clemson can get to that championship level if they dabble into the portal. Look at the way they recruit. They can absolutely be a national championship caliber program again. But it's a short list. It's a short list. And yeah, Oregon hasn't broken through yet. But in the next 5 years, I truly believe that they will. Because they've got the commitment. I think they've got the right coach. And they have shown that they can have everything that you need. All of the aspects to win a national championship. List them. Oregon's shown they can get there. Just because they haven't yet doesn't mean they won't or that they are incapable. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.